Hello, today I'm reviewing my new main mousepad, the EspTiger WuGi2. This is a pad that really surprised me. Going into it, I had zero expectations. The product description on its store page is appallingly uninformative, like bad even compared to EspTiger's other awful descriptions. And I had yet to see a decent review that explained the surface's feel well enough to satisfy me, or that didn't directly contradict what some others have said about the pad as far as the speed versus control argument. So information about this pad was murky at best. All I really knew about it was that it was generally high quality, it tried to be innovative with its weird tire tread backing, and that it had a cool looking design, which was enough for me to give it a chance and see for myself what it has to offer surface-wise, completely free of expectations. Now, normally this isn't something I do. I'll almost always go into a peripheral wanting something specific from it, especially when it comes to mousepads, whether that is a different take on a category or surface that I already enjoy to see if it can offer a marginal improvement, a type of surface that I'm unfamiliar with to try to broaden my perspective on the market as a whole and test if my preferences still hold up when challenged, or a unique approach to pad design that could offer an exciting experience that deviates in feel from other options. Regardless, on delivery day, I will always come into a new pad with a hypothesis of sorts that will dictate what I test it for and how I approach the entire process in my mind. Then from there, slowly I start to build up this profile of what the pad is like to use, all starting from my preconceived notions, not zero. This is a great process that has always worked out well for me personally. In particular, I think you should always go into product testing with defined objectives and a clear understanding of what you're testing something against, in order to have a process that is rigorous enough to create a truly detailed picture of what a product is like in use, whether you want to make a video about it like I do, or just decide what works out the best for your own personal preferences. But going into the WuGi2 with none of this in mind and just ripping it out of the box, plopping it down on my desk, booting up Kovacs for a quick warm-up, then hopping in a game felt amazing. I wasn't trying to pin it down to any one general category, speed, control, or some balance of the two that makes trade-offs. Instead, I was able to experience its entirely unique combination of quality seen in both speed and control surfaces in a vacuum, where I could be equally impressed by both how effortless the glide is and how locked in it can feel. And instead of expecting some specific surface material, I was pleasantly surprised by how good this smoothed out, highly synthetic fabric felt, since something this almost waxy would usually be a deal breaker based on past experiences, and probably would have made me pass on this pad if I knew about it before, which would have made me miss out on an incredible surface. Then, finally, I wasn't even expecting it to be good, really, so I was the most surprised at how perfect this pad has been for me lately for whatever I've thrown out of it. It's what I've gotten every new aim trainer PR with, one of the most comfortable with using in-game, and the most fun surface for me all at the same time. So, after using it heavily for over a month now, I can easily say it's my new main, well, along with two other pads, I'll get into that more later. So, I'm excited to go over what such a unique pad like this feels like for you guys in this video here. Alright, let's get into it. Where I need to start here is with an overview of this pad's general features and quality, because it does have a unique design that affects how it performs for better and for worse. First up, instead of using any normal textured rubber or foam for the backing, the WuGi2, along with the MOR and Neon Cyan in EspTiger's lineup, use this stiff sheet of rubber that starts to feel more like a tire than any normal pad backing. As far as how well it does to help the pad stick to your desk, it is absolute garbage. It doesn't have that same herringbone pattern that helps other rubber backs grab onto your desk surface, or any of the natural stickiness of neoprene, so it slides with almost no resistance. As you can see here, with very little force, the pad will start to glide quite easily, which feels horrible. Although, once you start to add downward force from your arm and wrist resting on the surface like you would in normal use, it's not that bad. It'll start to get a decent amount of stick, and I don't really have an issue with the pad drifting up over time like I do with other options, but it still tends to lurch around if you ever let up on this downward force. For example, in making a larger vertical movement, particularly up and to the right here, I'll lift my arm up a tad to stretch out, which reduces the downward force and makes the pad move at least a centimeter every time. It's awful. I have been able to adapt a little, and the pad does move less on me now than it used to, but it still happens, which is frustrating to say the least, and just really takes you out of it, which is horrible, and you never want that to happen. So, while this back is pretty bad at doing what a backing is usually supposed to do, it does give the pad a great feeling of rigidity. Instead of being soft and flexible like other cloth pads, the WuGi2 instead holds its shape and needs to be shipped and stored flat to avoid damaging it. Now, while we're on the topic of shipping, I must say that this pad's packaging is the best I've ever experienced, better than Artisan even. The cardboard is thick and double layered, so it seems really unlikely that it would get bent or punctured during shipping like I have seen some Artisans get. So, back to the pad. This feeling of rigidity does make this pad feel a little bit like a bridge between cloth and hard surfaces. The surface itself is still unmistakably cloth, and the rubber gives it a tiny bit of give, but it has this solid feel to it that I've never experienced on cloth before. which I feel has been able to incorporate some of the consistency of hard surfaces without the discomfort now that it's built so solidly. Plus, humidity and sweat have zero effect on the surface at all, which does a great deal to help it feel more consistent and reliable than any cloth pad I've ever used. It's almost glass pad level here, which is very impressive. Water is completely repelled by the surface, and it doesn't even get that sticky on your arm with heat and sweat buildup. It's great. It feels so consistent and so reliable in this regard. Then finally, this base also adds a decent amount of comfort and gives a satisfying tactile feel. It isn't quite squishy like the middle spongy layer of Artisan's or the thicker variations of other companies' pads, so your hand doesn't really sink in to create a pillowy feeling. Instead, this thicker rubber layer is firmer, so it doesn't give as much, but what give it has is far more elastic. It's so much so that it's almost bouncy ball-like in how it feels actually. I was super surprised by this. It is unlike anything else. This elasticity also does a great job of dampening shock force despite its firmness, because with the pad this solid feeling, you might expect it to be harsh when resetting your mouse, but this elasticity makes it feel like the force gets spread more evenly than on a traditional pad with a sponge. Once again, this is a one-of-a-kind feeling, and in this case, it is quite addictive, I felt. Other pads start to feel strange in comparison, because you start to expect the elasticity of this base, so the squishy sponges start to feel unresponsive and too forgiving to your movements like they never have before. Now, onto the stitching, it is not terrible, but still a little disappointing. It is close to the surface, so you don't feel a bump, which is always what bothers me the most on bad stitchings, so that's good. But the threads themselves are fairly abrasive, so it's not the most comfortable. I did get used to it, but it could be so much better. And it actually has started to fray a little bit here at the bottom after a month of use, so you don't even get the trade-off of better durability with these harsher threads. So really disappointing here. This could be so much better. But again, not terrible. I don't hate it, and I honestly don't even notice it anymore. But besides that, really, this pad feels super high quality in general. The rigidity I was talking about earlier gives it that exotic feel that is usually only found on Artisan's. I still won't say that it is Artisan quality, not even close honestly, because the backing is terrible and the stitching is a little bit uncomfortable, while Artisan's are literally perfect in every regard. But it is definitely a step up from the rest of the market in terms of how it feels in hand. It has that extra something to help set it apart from the crowd. Plus, the design is really well executed. The colors really pop and the line work is much cleaner than I thought it'd be. It is super aesthetically pleasing. My camera definitely does not do this pad justice. I need to make an upgrade soon. So overall, I definitely think that this pad is worth the extra markup of 40 plus shipping. Most pads are around 30 plus shipping, so this is definitely that next price tier up, but you do get something that stands out despite its flaws, which makes it easily worth, I feel. You should not be disappointed as long as you are aware that the backing is shit, because everything else is premium. Alright, now onto the most important part, the surface itself. Like I said before, this is really what makes the WuGi2 so special and the part that blew me away. First up, the material itself is synthetic and feels like polyester gym shorts actually. If for reference, my old soccer uniform bottoms here feel like the exact same fabric. They have that same waxy feel of the individual fibers and a little bit of texture from the weave pattern. It's just that the WuGi2 is tighter and more densely threaded, which makes it far smoother. But the material feel is again exactly the same. I cannot stress this enough, it is so close. And the WuGi2 still does have a bit of texture to it too. It's not quite like most traditional cloth pads where the top of the surface is completely flat and you don't feel anything. Instead, the diagonal patterned weave does create tiny bumps that come through your mouse feet, albeit not as much as rough surfaces, of course. And instead, the smoothness comes from how slick the polyester's fibers are in their glide. So it feels quite special just to move your mouse across the surface, because I've never experienced this type of slick smoothness before, and it is definitely something that has grown on me over time. A more explicitly textured, rough surface would still be better for my tastes, but after using glass feet, which tend to smooth out rougher pads, and putting a lot of time on completely smooth control surfaces in the past few months, texture is starting to be less and less important for me. It is still always nice to have, and I may enjoy the WuGi2 more if it was more heavily textured, but it is not required for me to feel properly in control of my mouse anymore, so I'm really starting to appreciate how satisfying a smooth and clean glide feels. And in this regard, the WuGi2 is second to none in my opinion. My immediate impression was how incredible it felt just to swipe your mouse and arm across such an amazing synthetic surface. Also, besides just making for a very satisfying glide, the surface material and weave is what makes the WuGi2 feel uniquely high performing. The slick and smooth fibers give the pad a decently fast glide with very low static friction. For reference, somewhere around the Artisan hand speed range where most hybrid pads sit, so you don't at all feel inhibited on small motions where you have to fight the pad a bit to get the mouse moving, or have to apply a large amount of force to make in or hand motions. It is super effortless to make correction movements just like how a speed pad would be. Of course though, you do lack the rough texture of a hybrid surface here, which can help make these corrections feel more reliable. But the way the WuGi2 accelerates feels very linear, and the mouse smoothly picks up speed as it gets it moving. It is incredibly consistent, almost like a glass pad again. So I found that it was very easy to learn how to reliably correct my aim despite how smooth and fast it feels for these motions. Just be aware that there's a bit of a learning curve here because of how unique its surface feels overall. So to reiterate, for these small motions it feels effortless and unrestrictive, just like a speed pad. But overall, this pad doesn't actually feel that fast to me, and instead I think about it as more of a control pad in terms of how it performs in game. This is all due to the combination of that tight weave texture and the uniquely elastic base underneath it. What it does is that whenever you start to make fast movements or apply more downward force to your mouse, the friction starts to increase dramatically, because just like the gym shorts I brought out earlier, the surface is intended to flex a little bit, and when it flexes, the texture starts to grab your feet more and more as the weave gets stretched out. Even when just rubbing your fingers up against the surface, you can feel it cling on the moment you push into the rubber and flexing the weave. Of course, this also extends to your mouse speed as well. During large, fast swipes where you're more heavy-handed, there is a moderate amount of dynamic friction that slows it down to the point where it starts to feel close to a more balanced control pad, like the Artisan Zero, for example, on these motions. And the stopping power is incredible as well. The moment you end your flick and apply downward force to help stop your mouse, it glues to the pad so quickly and stays there. As long as you keep that downward force after you move, it is highly stable and feels locked in with as much stability as I'd ever need for something slower like a tack shooter, just like with a balanced control pad. But unlike those surfaces, the WuGi2 still has that effortless feel, because the moment you want to start moving your mouse and make a correction or another large movement, you let up on the force a little bit. Then your mouse starts to move completely effortless again for you to do whatever you want. Then the moment you tense up back up again to stop, it's locked in seamlessly. It is crazy. There's such a nice balancing act here between alternating from feeling quick to precise. So these qualities are why I say that this pad more so has a combination of features found in both speed and control pads, instead of a balance between speed and control like so many other milquetoast surfaces try to be. So evenly transitioned between these two extremes that it feels completely seamless and highly fluid, which is incredible. Of course though, to get this feeling, you will have to have an aiming style where you are a little heavy-handed and tend to use your mouse more aggressively. If you do use a very light touch on your mouse with little additional force, this pad will absolutely start to feel slippery, since the majority of your friction will be lost. Good Enough Tech Reviews, for example, complained in his recent review of this pad that it felt like an ice rink, and it would only be controllable by, quote, tweaking Adderall-infused twitch aimers with the reflexes of a hummingbird. This opinion is of course valid because everyone has their own use cases for pads, but I think in this case it is entirely because of the dainty grip he uses, like you can see in his HSK Plus review, because even when I use the M2K, I have a more aggressive grip that actively applies downward force, which makes the pad feel quite controlled and much slower. But if I try the Get Reviews grip, I can start to see where it comes from here. It can get a little tweaky if you only barely push down on the mouse. So keep that in mind. If you don't actively press down, this pad will start to feel quite fast. This is probably the main reason that there have been so many conflicting reports of how controlled or how fast this pad is in practice. But if you are heavier-handed, more snappy aimer like me, I cannot recommend this pad highly enough. You should still expect there to be a bit of a learning curve, because something that can so readily change its amount of friction based on how you use it, and that blurs the lines between our traditional definitions of speed and control, will feel a little bit awkward at first. But the surface is so consistent that you can still learn it by putting in the time to wrap your head around its uniqueness, just like a glass pad again. Finally, I should quickly mention that this is my favorite pad for glass feet. It is such a natural combination for these that I would be remiss not to mention it specifically. In general, very synthetic surfaces are the best for creating a satisfying glide with glass, so these polyester fibers feel great to glide across. And the slight texture on the weave is still able to show through to create a little bit of feedback to counteract the floatiness that you can sometimes get as well. Also, the WuGi2 is already a pad with low static friction and decent dynamic, so glass just amplifies these qualities further and helps emphasize what the WuGi2 already does well. It is just a perfect fit. So, in conclusion, this pad is nuts. It is the most unique surface I've ever tried. It has been my highest performing option as of late. It's versatile, and most importantly, it is incredibly fun to use. It is easily one of my new mains. Although, I do have to say one of my new mains, because currently I have about 3 in rotation that each offer their own things. That would be the LGG Saturn, WuGi2, and likely the first award from Padsmith. The Saturn here is for when I want a higher friction surface for more control and maximum consistency. This pad has been incredibly good for me lately, and I've liked it more and more after making my review. It is actually flawless in my opinion, and it would likely be my go-to pad for reliable, long-term performance. The only issue is that I've always felt that control surfaces have inherently lower ceilings due to their higher friction slowing you down a little bit. So here's where a pad like the first War comes in. This pad in specific isn't a lock for the speed pad slot for me personally because I haven't been able to put enough time on it to be sure, but this has been the speed pad that I've enjoyed the most so far along with the Hien. These surfaces are always aim trainer demons and are very satisfying to get good with in game, so I'll always have one of these in rotation for when I want a change of pace and the potential for a higher ceiling. Then finally we're back to the WuGi2 here, the number one to round out the list. This one functions very well as a bridge between those other two options and a great middle point. The only thing that really holds us back from being the 100% main for me is that it does have a very exotic, highly unique feel to it that can be a little off-putting at times. So I'll still definitely prefer something that performs more standardly sometimes. And when that happens, the Saturn and First War are waiting for me. I'll get into this topic of specific mousepad choices more in a full video that I'll try to get out in about the next month. This video has been a long time in the making because I initially wanted to do a top pads list with clearly numbered positions like I did with my mouse list, but I found it so hard to place pads in a clear hierarchy when they are all just so unique. It's not like mice where they all do the same thing really, just with minor differences that are easier to point out, which helps to define what most closely aligns with your preferences and differentiates mice from each other. But with pads, the differences in feel is so great that it feels like comparing apples and oranges. So instead I'll be making a video that details what pad is my favorite in each major category, like my favorite slow control pad, favorite balance control pad, favorite hybrid, and so on, all in the same video to try to help give you guys a good idea of the market as a whole, and I hope to help you pick out what your next pad will be based on which category is your favorite. Again, you can look forward to that in about a month or so. In the meantime though, I have other pads I need to review and more mice to talk about. I'll try my hardest to start to increase the video cadence to try to cover everything I want to talk about. Thank you all for watching and supporting the channel up until this point. Hope to see you all in the next one.